2 weeks ago, on Friday night, I spoke about the situation in Israel. 3 days later, Yoni, my youngest son, and I landed in Tel Aviv to one of the most crazy and chaotic weeks in the history of the state of Israel. I went there mainly to visit my family, but I spent the entire week just reading all the Israeli newspapers, watching TV. I never watched TV here, but in Israel I was glued to the TV and was surfing between all the channels. I spoke to as many people as I could, and everyone was talking only about the situation there. And on Saturday night, I joined between 600,000, some even say more, people in a large demonstration. I took Yoni too, just you have to learn from a young age how to be a political activist. So before I'll describe you this crazy week, I just want to illustrate what is happening there. I spoke about it 2 weeks ago. Actually, about 40,000 people watched the video of this sermon. I guess people want to know what's happening. Let me just illustrate it in a different way today. So we vote for the House of Representatives, we vote for the Senate separately, we vote for the President. We have a constitution, we have a Supreme Court, and this is only the federal level. Now we have 50 states with more or less similar structure. Now assume that somebody will redesign the system. They will combine the House of Representatives, the Senate, to one parliament, and guarantee that the president always has a majority. On top of it, they will cancel the Constitution. This is the situation right now in Israel, even before the judiciary overhaul. Israel has one parliament in which the prime minister always has a majority. Israel has no constitution. The only check and balances in Israel is the Supreme Court. So Yuval Noah Harari, the celebrated historian and philosopher, wrote an article yesterday, I guess, in Haaretz, in the Israeli paper, and he asked, so how did the Israeli democracy survive for 75 years? Because it's very easy for a leader or political party just to assume unlimited power. And he said, because until now, the Israeli leaders and the Israeli people really like democracy. They like the system. So today, one group says that they have a majority, they can do whatever they want because they have 64 out of the 120 seats in the Knesset. So they do have a majority. But there were parties in the past in which they had majority of 75, even 111, and nobody ever challenged the democratic system until 3 months ago. If you ask yourself why millions of Israelis protest daily, and Saturday night is the huge one, because they fear that Israel will cease being a democracy. Now, it's not that the other side wants a different regime. They say that they are the real democratic people because they are the majority, and as the majority, you can do whatever you want. But that's not the real definition of democracy. Democracy really has majority rule, but also has to protect the minority. Minority rights, human rights, civil rights. And what some people in Israel want to do now is to weaken the power of the Supreme Court, meaning to cancel, to annul all the checks and balances, and create a situation in which when you have a majority, you can do anything you want, including to change the democracy. You can say that some groups are not allowed to vote, and without the Supreme Court, who can tell you that it's not legal. Remember, no constitution. Already, there are some suggestions. Now, Israel has election every 4 years, or at least. In theory, they want to postpone the next election now a year. There is a proposal now that the party that governs, that has the majority, will get an extra 12 members of the Knesset, just because. Okay, you can change it easily if you don't have checks and balances. So some say that in America we have too many checks and balances, and that's why sometimes it's hard to do things. But Israel is going in the direction of having absolutely no checks and balances. And the word that is used frequently, I didn't say it so much in the American press, but in Israel, everyone uses the word dictatorship. Because, as you know, Israelis are very direct, and the opposite of democracy is dictatorship. Because you are about to give the leaders an unlimited, unrestrained power. So we landed there on Monday night, too late, and the week started. Why was that week so important? Because on the following Monday, the government was supposed to vote on the 2 laws that will jeopardize the democratic nature of Israel. They were going to vote to change the committee that elects the Supreme Court. They were going to still, they approved it, they just did not have the last vote. They are going to demand that the government, the majority, the governing coalition will always have a majority on this committee. In other words, the government or the prime minister will appoint the Supreme Court judges. Now you may say, but that's a system in the United States, right? As the prime minister in Israel said. Yes, but Israel has no constitution. Israel does not have 2 houses and a president and a federal level and a state level and everything that we have here. Meaning they want the Supreme Court to be below the government. And the second law is really that if the Supreme Court cancels a law that the Knesset legislates, the Knesset will be able to override the Supreme Court. Okay, so the leaders will become absolute leaders. So every day, there was an escalation in the protest. Now, if it were only people on the streets, well, I don't think that a lot would have happened, but the pressure grew. I mentioned it last time, most of it came from the army, especially the reservists. Israel has the largest, or at least the most powerful army in the Middle East. That's the only reason we survived and will survive. But this army is heavily based on reservists. And many of the elite soldiers, mainly the pilots who train once a week, and other members of the elite units in Israel said, we are not showing up for training. Unheard of. Never happened in Israel. Nobody ever thought that it would happen. They said, we gave our life, we're willing to give our life to defend a democratic state, not a dictatorship. And this is huge. So you have all the heads, all the chiefs of the Air Force who are still alive. You have almost all the generals who ever served, all the people who are decorated from all the wars, almost all of them, saying, this is crazy. You are ruining our beautiful country. we're not going to cooperate with that. So that was major. Now, almost all the heads of all the companies, especially the high-tech, which, as you know, is really advanced in Israel, and the banks and billions of dollars left Israel because people did not really start losing their confidence in the Israeli economy. The shekel, the value of the shekel went down significantly. The stock exchange went down significantly. On Thursday, the Minister of Defense, or Minister of Security, as it's called in Israel, his name is Gallant, said that he was about to have a press conference at 7:30 p.m. Now, if I'll ask an average American, who is the Secretary of Defense, I don't believe that many people will be able to give me the name. You're probably thinking, right? Lloyd Houston, if you need to know. Okay? But in Israel, the Secretary of Defense is the second most important leader after the Prime Minister. Always been, because the main issue in Israel is security. You know, we are in a very rough neighborhood. We have to watch and fight constantly. So the Secretary of Defense, almost always, a retired general, is well respected by the people from his party, political party, but also from the other side, because they know that that person, after all, is less of a politician and more of a person who wants to defend Israel. So Yoav Gallant, the Minister of Defense, said that he would give a press conference, a statement at 7:30. But then the Prime Minister, Netanyahu, spoke to him before, and Netanyahu said, "You don't speak, I'm going to give a statement at 8 p.m. So we all gathered around the TV and waiting for Netanyahu to speak, and most people believed that Netanyahu would say that he was going to postpone the legislation. That was Thursday. The vote was supposed to take place on Monday. When Netanyahu said it, the shekel immediately got stronger, stock exchange went up, everyone was optimistic, and then Netanyahu started to talk. And he talked beautifully about the need of unity, and people should talk to each other, and compromises and negotiation, and trust me, I'm going to defend the civil rights and the human rights of everything, but next Monday we're going to pass the law. I think that the expression of putting oil on fire couldn't have been more accurate. Because in a speech that I don't know why he thought would calm things down, he just turned everything much worse. Especially since most people thought that he would just postpone it. Why Monday was so important? Because the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, was about to take a month-long break. And they wanted to pass this legislation before the break. Okay, so that was the idea. So people were, okay, do it after Passover, after Yom Ha'atzmaut, Independence Day. But then he said, no, I'm going to continue with my plans. But be nice and don't. The next day, of course, more demonstrations, more organizations, NGOs, just talked against the plan. More soldiers and officers spoke against it. And then Netanyahu went to London. He was not welcomed really nicely, because in the world they are quite concerned. Because there are other countries that went down this path, like Poland recently and Hungary, but they don't have nuclear weapon. Israel does, a lot. Okay, so you don't want a non-democratic state quite close to you, think about Europeans, who has nuclear weapon. In any case, he went to London, and that's other stories that I will skip now about what he ate and how. On Sunday morning, Sunday in Israel is a regular day. The weekend in Israel is Friday, Saturday. Okay, so Sunday is a regular day. Gallant, again, the Minister of Defense, said that he was going to speak, and he did. And he said that the government, his government, must stop this legislation. He didn't say that the legislation is problematic. He didn't talk. He said, for the sake of Israel's security. He said the army is disintegrating. Our enemies will take advantage of it. If you follow, you know that Iran is about 5 minutes away from having a nuclear bomb. We have issues with Hezbollah in the north. The Ramadan started last week too, and the Ramadan is the most dangerous time in which there are often clashes between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And without a strong, well-functioning army with all the reservists to show up when they're told to, Israel is weak. That's more or less what he said. That evening, Netanyahu came back from London and fired him. And then all hell broke loose. Because when your Secretary of Defense warns you that the army will not be ready, that there is an existential danger to Israel, you don't fire that person. And again, he is a very well-respected general, respected by the military, respected by the people. Immediately, without any plan, Israelis went to the streets. It was late at night. It started at 8, 9 p.m. I did not go to that demonstration, but for the whole night, they blocked roads, they demonstrated. The following morning, the trade unions announced that they are going to close down the economy. Even the Histadrut, which is the biggest trade union that controls the ports, the airport, at that point it was personal because we were supposed to fly the next day, and they shut down the airport. The malls, the shopping malls closed down. The Israeli bar associations told these members not to appear in court. I mean, really, Israel just started to shut down very fast. And then Netanyahu said the next day that he will give another speech, only a few days later. And in that speech, he finally said that he is freezing the legislation. He doesn't say that he won't do it. He said he will deal with it after the break of the Knesset. He gave all the indications that he's about to pass these laws. But at least for a month, nobody is going to do anything. As I was on the airplane back, I could not read the papers. They realized that what happened that day between Netanyahu firing the defense minister and Netanyahu's speech, in which he agreed at least to postpone the whole process in a month, was a very strong, rare pressure from the United States. And the message that Netanyahu got, not in these words, because, diplomats speak nicer than that, but the message was very clear. They said, yes, Israel is the most important ally of the United States in the Middle East. And the reason is that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. But if Israel ceases being a democracy, we don't need you guys. Again, this is my paraphrase of what was said, but that was a clear message. We have this connection, we have this bond that has been really strong, but it's a bond between two democracies. not between a democracy and a dictatorship. There are enough dictatorships in the Middle East with much more oil than Israel will ever have. And that's probably put a lot of pressure. But that's not the end. After Netanyahu said that he would postpone it, the American president spoke about it, and he was still angry with Netanyahu, and he went as far as saying that he has no plans to invite him to the White House. This is quite big. This is a major crisis. You can like the president, you cannot like the president, but one thing we have to admit, Israel needs the United States, much more than the United States needs Israel. Especially now, when we need America to help us with Iran. This is serious stuff now. Iran having a nuclear weapon is not a small thing. Israel cannot deal with it without the backup and support of the United States. And this is happening now as they're fighting on who is going to be on a committee that selects judges. Israel is really facing serious existential threats now. So that's where we are now. I think we can celebrate Passover quietly, knowing that nothing will happen. For Netanyahu to pass these laws, all he needs is less than 24 hours. Because the committee is already, I'm not going to tell you how it exactly works, approved, voted for them. And all he needs is a vote in the Knesset, and he has a majority of 64 now. Okay? So I don't really know. Now, my personal impression, of course, things are not good. But let me give you a few good things, not because I feel the need to do it, but it's true. That's how I felt, and that's what I want to convey to you. First of all, despite millions of people protesting, how many casualties? 0. Have you ever heard of hundreds of thousands of people protesting daily? Sometimes up to 1 million people all around Israel? Nobody got hurt. It's all peaceful. It's not violent, which is beautiful. Hopefully it will stay like that. The other thing is that Israelis, not only do they care about the nature of their state, because a lot of the demonstrations around the world are about economic things, right? The high prices of housing and bread. They understand the complexity. You cannot just tell them that it doesn't really matter who is on the committee that chooses judges. They fully understand, they get the nuances, and they're willing to risk everything to keep Israel as a liberal democracy, which is really inspiring. It's really beautiful to see. The civil society of Israel that I think has been a little bit slumber in the past years because we did other things like the high-tech or the startup nation, as we sometimes are called, said, no, there are things that are more important. This is our heart and our soul, and we're not going to give up. So quietly, civilly, without violence, people protest, demonstrate, do everything they can, and hopefully this horrible idea of taking away the power of the Supreme Court will disappear. And now I have another hope. For 75 years, Israel has been talking about the need to write a constitution. We just didn't get to that. I mean, it's more complex than that, but now it's very clear. So if you really want to make some changes, don't talk about little things. Start with the Constitution. And then, and everyone agrees, the judiciary system in Israel does need a reform, but not a reform that will take away completely and crash the democratic nature of our beloved country. So hopefully I will not have to speak about it for some time, and hopefully our leaders will wake up knowing that we have one Jewish state, and we're not going to jeopardize it. Shabbat Shalom.